You may be seated. Shabbat Shalom. There's an ancient tradition that on this Shabbat HaGadol, the Sabbath that precedes Pesach, is the big rabbinic sermon of the year. And in ancient times especially, the rabbi's sermon would quite literally go on for 2 to 3 hours. So I hope you're comfortable. We have had a challenging week. Now, all kidding aside, between the airliner that crashed and all of us have been following what's been happening with that, to perhaps something maybe you haven't paid such close attention to, and that's the war going on in Yemen right now. My fear is that the war going on in Yemen is not just my fear, it's lots of people's fear. That the war going on in Yemen is really just symptomatic of the start of a much bigger regional conflagration that could happen between Sunnis and Shia. So it's worth watching what is happening in Yemen right now. As you talk about a potential World War III, this is something that could turn into World War III. So it's against that backdrop that I began studying this week's Torah portion, Parshat Tzav. And of course, it is a strange juxtaposition, the world we live in, which is a very modern world, against the system of sacrifices discussed in our Torah portion this week. And all of it really came together as I read the weekly Devar Torah from Lord Dr. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. And really, there's no better title for a Jew than Lord. But you know, he was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. He's since retired, so I don't know if it doesn't make him formally a Lord, right? Once a Lord, always a Lord. But really, Rabbi Sacks is a wise and astute man, and I'm a student of his text. You can go online and access a lot of his teachings. He brings forward this teaching. Give me a second. Can you hear me? He brings forward this teaching actually from Rabbi Joseph Elbow, who was a 15th century rabbi and scholar in Europe. And they come to try to explain the meaning of the sacrifices. Right? Because we know so much of our Torah is consumed with this idea of sacrifice. Now, if you reached into the Torah, grabbed onto Leviticus, and yanked it out, there'd actually be no break in the text. There'd be no break in the text. It would be a seamless narrative of our people, of course, creation, and our people leaving Mitzrayim and on their way to Israel. But Leviticus stands in there as this exceptional, unique book that really just comes to describe the system of sacrifices that was instituted in the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and then continued into the days of the Holy Temple. Now, according to Rabbi Elbow through Rabbi Sacks, really in order to understand the meaning of the sacrifices, you have to go back and look at the earliest of times. And as Rabbi Sacks comes to teach, sacrifices exist. Right? Sacrifices are a substitute for violence directed against mankind. It says the entire system of sacrifices that we mostly reject as an ancient system of the past are a substitute for violence directed against mankind. So we first look to Cain and Abel, the very beginning of Genesis. Abel, son of Adam and Eve, became a keeper of sheep. And Cain, Abel's older brother, became a tiller of the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord from Pri Ha'adamah, from the fruit of the soil. And Abel, for his part, brought the choicest of firstlings of his flock. The Lord paid heed to Abel and his offering, but to Cain and his offerings he paid no heed. Why did God give preference to Abel's offering over Cain's? Any guesses? Does God like meat more than he likes vegetables? It's a strange idea. Our rabbis come to read the fact that the Torah tells us that Abel brought the choicest of his firstlings, whereas Cain brought only the fruit of the soil, which in this case is vegetables, not the best yield. He didn't even bring apples and wonderful fruit that grew from the tree. He brought the vegetables. Who likes vegetables? It's probably Brussels sprouts. So here, Cain brings the mediocre of his crop, while Abel brings the best of his what he had. And so God chooses Abel's offering over Cain's. In our eyes, it's because Abel brought the best, and Cain brought that which was mediocre. But Cain, given his time, didn't understand it. Cain saw that God liked Abel's sacrifice better. And so Cain says, according to the Midrash, that if God likes sheep, which is a higher form of life than vegetables, Cain says, maybe I'll bring an even higher form of life than sheep as an offering to God. And of course, what happens next? We know Cain was much distressed, and when they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him. According to Rabbi Joseph Elbel, the very first recorded murder in history came about as a result of a misunderstanding. Cain sought to bring what he thought was the highest form of life, humans, as a sacrifice to God. Of course, that's not what God wanted. God just wanted people to bring the best of their hearts, the best of what they had. Cain misunderstood, and thereby really brought violence into the world. Of course, you could say Adam and Eve eating from the tree, the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, maybe they brought violence into the world, but it really didn't come to be known until Cain killed Abel. We fast forward now a few chapters of the book of Genesis, and we come now to Parshat Noah, to the story of Noah. And we read here that Noah built an altar to the Lord. This is following the flood. And taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood." Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God has God made man." Now our rabbis look to this and they say, what a strange juxtaposition of verses. What in the world is going on? Does God like sacrifices? Well, God likes when we bring our very best. And so here the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma of the sacrifices that Noah offered, not because God specifically likes sacrifices, our Midrashim come to teach, but because Noah was so truly grateful that he brought the very best. Right? He brought the clean animals and the clean birds and truly offered from his heart. And God saw this. And God, who of course created all creatures, was actually dismayed. He was happy that Noah would bring something from, truly from the bottom of his heart, but he was upset that Noah would sacrifice. Here God just worked so hard to save all these animals on the ark. And what does Noah do? He goes and kills someone. So God realizes every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And in this we see a real central teaching of Jewish theology, which is truly that there is something evil within us, our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, that exists in us from the very beginning, that it's up to each of us to overcome. We have to overcome the Yetzer Hara. And God sees that humankind is in trouble. God remembers back to Cain and Abel. God thinks about human life, and of course, there's the Tower of Babel, and we know the Midrashim about that, and how people died involved in the Tower of Babel. And God realizes that every inclination of human heart is evil from childhood. So God blesses Noah and his sons, saying to them, "No longer shall humankind be vegetarian, as they were up until the days of Noah. But now you shall eat meat." Because God says, I see something in humankind that wants to kill. There's something within us, this burning drive for violence that wants to kill. So God says, okay, you're so inclined to kill, you want to be violent, at least do it against the animals. But God says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For the image of God is God made man. God sees that we are violent from our core and so directs us against the animal kingdom rather than against human life. And in this way, God hopes that our violence will be dissuaded or at least distracted. So we'll take out our anger and vengeance upon lower forms of life rather than the highest form of life. Which brings us, of course, to the Sefer, the book that we're reading now, the book of Leviticus, and our own Torah portion this morning, Parshat Tzav, where we read about so many of the rituals of the sacrificial service. Such are the rituals of the burnt offering we read this week, the grain offering, the purification offering, the reparation offering, the offering of ordination, and the sacrifice of well-being, with which the Lord charged Moses on Mount Sinai, when he commanded that the Israelites present their offerings to the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai. So here we are. We see the very fact that we can have, as we saw in the cover of the Wall Street Journal, we can have scotch and steak in advance of our Seders. We see that we humankind need to almost be violent against something. And so God gives us permission to be meat eaters. I'm sure some of you will be enjoying brisket, meatballs on Passover. What's the one meat you're really not allowed, one kosher meat you're not allowed to have at the Passover Seder? Lamb. Right? Because it's too reminiscent of the Passover sacrifice, and so you're forbidden from eating lamb at your Seder too. So here we humans have been permitted to eat meat as a response to our need to be violent. But also, God instituted, or at least allowed, the system of sacrifices because of this need to kill. So what happens when in 586 BCE and then again in 70 of CE, the holy temples are destroyed? And our ability to institute this sacrificial system is destroyed. How can we overcome that urge for violence? And here we turn to the prophet Amos. So why do we no longer sacrifice? Even though you bring me burnt offerings, God says, and offerings of grain, I will not accept them, but let justice roll down like a river, and righteousness like a never-failing stream. God sees for 2,000 years this system of sacrifice doesn't actually prevent humankind's need for violence. And even more so, a particular subset of violence, as we see certainly in what's going on in Yemen today. And perhaps we have yet to see what exactly happened with the German airliner. But certainly with what's happening in Yemen today, a subset of a particular form of violence, vengeance. God sees that the sacrificial system does not alleviate mankind's need for violence in general, but vengeance specifically. So God begins to tell the prophets, we no longer need this sacrificial system. What we need is justice. Right? Tzedek tirdov, justice shall you pursue. Because only when people perceive a true sense of justice are they able to overcome their yetzer hara, their evil inclination. When people truly perceive that justice can happen, we no longer feel a need for violence. And so Rabbi Sachs comes to conclude, sacrifices are not ends in themselves, but part of the Torah's program. It's not a misspelling, he's got the funny British words. But part of the Torah's program to construct a world redeemed from the otherwise interminable cycle of revenge. The other part of that program, and God's greatest desire, is a world governed by justice. That, we recall, was God's first charge to Abraham, to instruct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and what is just. Of course, since the temple was destroyed almost 2,000 years ago, it has been up to the Jewish people to be Or LaGoyim, to be a light of the nations, and to really bring this concept of justice and righteousness to the world. We have to work hard. we have to be more determined in what we do. And not only those within our country who truly suffer from their Yetzer Hara, but throughout the world, may be pacified, may be brought to peace, because they truly feel that justice is being served. We have to educate. We have to work hard to set up fair systems of court. We have to truly bring justice to this world. And in that way, not only will we see why the sacrificial system is no longer necessary, but we will truly work to bring the one person we sing about at our Passover Seder, Eliyahu HaNavi, Elijah the prophet, who will come and usher in an age of true peace and righteousness because of the justice we've brought or working to bring in the world today. May God grant us the strength to bring tzedek, mishpat, righteousness, and justice into this world. And in that way, may God bless us all with peace. And let us say together.